My name is Marlowe Jennings. I spent 22 years as a federal investigator with the FBI field office out of Chicago. Counterintelligence, financial fraud, identity crimes. I've put away senators. I've dismantled rings that operated across 14 states. I retired at 53, moved to a quiet little town in central Ohio called Grover Falls, bought a house with a porch and a garden, and told myself, Marlowe, you're done. Let somebody else carry the badge. And for 3 years, I actually believed that. Then came the bill. It was a Tuesday morning in October. The leaves were doing that thing they do in Ohio, turning the whole world into a postcard. I was sitting at my kitchen table with my coffee, going through my mail like I always did. Medical explanation of benefits from my insurance provider. Routine stuff. I almost tossed it without reading it. Almost. But something caught my eye. A charge. $412. Billed 2 weeks prior. For a follow-up consultation at the office of Dr. Gerald Hatch, my primary care physician. I hadn't been to Dr. Hatch's office in 4 months. I set my coffee down. Slowly. The way you do when your brain shifts gears without asking your body for permission. I read the line again. Then I read the whole document. Then I went and pulled every EOB I'd received in the last 12 months and laid them all out on my kitchen table like evidence. Because that's exactly what they were becoming. In 11 months, there were 6 charges I could not account for. 6 appointments I never attended. 6 co-pays billed to my insurance for a woman who was home, or grocery shopping, or sitting on her porch while someone, somewhere, was pretending to be her doctor's patient. 6 times. $648 total. Small enough to miss. That was the point. Now here is where most people would call their insurance company. File a complaint. Maybe switch doctors. And that would have been the reasonable thing to do. But I didn't build a 22-year career by doing the reasonable thing. I drove to the records office at my county hospital and requested copies of every claim ever filed under my name and my insurance ID going back to the day I moved to Grover Falls. It took them a week to pull everything. When the envelope arrived, I made another pot of coffee, sat back down at that kitchen table, and opened it. I want you to understand what I felt in that moment. It wasn't anger. Anger is loud and sloppy. What I felt was something cold and clear, like a river in January, because what I found in that envelope wasn't 6 fraudulent charges. It was 61. 61 fabricated appointments, phantom lab tests, ghost procedures, stretching back 10 years. 10 years of quiet, careful theft billed in amounts small enough to avoid automatic fraud flags. The largest single charge was $800. The smallest was $42. But added together, across a decade, Dr. Gerald Hatch had billed my insurance provider, and by extension stolen from me, just under $47,000. $47,000. And then I found something that made my blood run cold. Something that changed this from a personal crime into something much, much larger. My name wasn't the only one in the file anomalies I was tracking. When I cross-referenced billing dates and procedure codes, habits die hard. I found patterns. Identical phantom charges appearing across multiple patient ID numbers on the same dates. The same procedure code. The same billing block. Someone wasn't just stealing from me. Someone had been running a ghost patient operation out of a small Ohio family practice for over a decade. I didn't call the local police. I want to be honest with you about why. Not because I didn't trust them, but because what I was looking at required resources, jurisdiction, and a specific kind of institutional knowledge that a county sheriff's office in rural Ohio simply does not have. What I had uncovered was federal healthcare fraud. Title 18. United States Code, Section 1347. I knew that statute the way most people know their morning commute. So I made a phone call. To a woman named Diane Okafor, my former supervisor at the Chicago field office. We hadn't spoken in almost 2 years. She picked up on the second ring. I said, Diane, I need you to listen to me for about 10 minutes and not say anything. She said, Marlowe, it's 7 in the morning. I said, I know. I've been up since 4. She listened. When I finished, there was a silence that lasted long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then she said, send me everything. I sent her everything. What happened next took 4 months. 4 months of me sitting in my garden, pruning my roses, having coffee with my neighbor Linda, going to the actual appointments I actually scheduled with a new doctor in the next town over, while 40 miles away, a federal investigation was quietly, methodically wrapping its arms around Gerald Hatch's entire professional life. They found 43 additional patients, most of them elderly, most of them on fixed incomes with Medicare as their primary coverage. People who never checked their EOBs. People who trusted their doctor the way people in small towns trust their doctor, completely, without question. The total amount of fraudulent billing across all patients over 12 years came to just over $1.1 million. $1.1 million. And here is the twist that I did not see coming. The one that made even me, 22 years in federal law enforcement, seen everything, sit back and genuinely say out loud to an empty room, you have got to be kidding me. Gerald Hatch had a partner, not a medical partner, not a billing administrator. His partner was a woman named Susan Falk, the owner of the medical billing software company that serviced 11 practices across central Ohio. She had built a secondary algorithm into her own software, invisible to the practices using it, that identified low-activity patient accounts and auto-generated phantom claims on a rotating cycle. Hatch wasn't even manually filing the fraudulent charges himself. The software was doing it. He simply received a monthly deposit into a private LLC account and looked the other way. Susan Falk's software had been installed in 11 practices. 11 practices. Across 3 counties. For 14 years. The arrests happened on a Wednesday morning in February. I know because Diane called me while I was making breakfast. She said, it's done. I said, both of them? She said, both of them. And 3 others connected to the LLC. I stood in my kitchen, spatula in hand, eggs on the stove, and I felt something settle in my chest. Not triumph, not satisfaction exactly, something quieter than that. Something that felt like the closing of a very long file. Gerald Hatch was charged with federal healthcare fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. He faced up to 20 years. Susan Falk faced additional charges for computer fraud under the FA on top of everything else. The sentencing came 8 months later. Hatch received 14 years in federal prison. Falk received 9 My insurance provider, along with 11 others, filed civil suits and recovered the majority of the stolen funds. A victims' restitution fund was established for the patients, most of them elderly, most of them never knowing they had been robbed for over a decade by the person they trusted with their health.